much of the work that we've done in the last few months, kind of behind the scenes, has been about bringing together these different aspects of our work. So it's not just the research. The research doesn't stand alone or separate from our other work, from the engagement work, but it also is intertwined with our educational and leadership development work, and indeed with our ultimately our aim of kind of disseminating and engaging with the sector. So, just to come back to the research that we're planning and talk a bit about the key features, as I see it, of our research programme. And there are 6 points that I want to draw attention to, and again, they are all interrelated. The first thing I think that's important is that as an academic and as a representative of a university, I think the first thing that's very important about our research is the sense of it coming from a base of academic rigour, and indeed aiming for, shooting for, if you like, a sense of international significance. So I see that's one feature, not necessarily the most important feature, but one very important feature of the work that we're doing. And I think ultimately that sense of academic rigour and the crucial kind of importance of planning, careful planning, Deborah mentioned this earlier, the kind of sense of working with, rigorously working with data is a key foundation of our status, if you like, as academics, giving us a sense that we can feed into debates across a whole different range of issues. I also think it's really important that the research will ultimately feed into and interact with the leadership development courses that Carol and Owain are going to talk about next. And I think that's an ongoing process. I think that the work we do should have an impact on wider debates around leadership, not just in the voluntary sector, but more widely. And I think as part of what we do, should always be thinking about active engagement with practice and policy debates. Obviously, these 2 issues are very closely linked. But finally, I think it's also really important to touch on 2, again, related issues. One is the importance of the active involvement of participants in the work that we do, and the active involvement in discussion and refinement of the findings of the research. And finally, as we've already touched on, one of our key aims is to disseminate the research as widely as possible. I want to talk about what I see as the kind of key central research project, which is at the heart of everything we do, and I hope will become a real kind of legacy for the centre and a real kind of central resource that we will draw in all sorts of different ways, and which I think will be of considerable importance to our wider aims around education and engagement, for example. So the leadership panel, essentially, what we're proposing is that we would like to create a panel of leaders in the voluntary sector who we will engage with over time. So initially we're talking about 3 years, but it could be longer. And we want to engage with them in a variety of different ways. So we can talk about dividing the panel up in different ways. So we might think of a local group of voluntary sector leaders. We might think of the panel as a whole national panel that we might want to engage in for certain activities. Or we can think about that panel being divided up by different sort of fields of activity or different kind of subsectors, if you like. There might be employment or criminal justice or children, organisations with a children's focus, for example. And then we think we will engage with them in a variety of different ways through different research methods. So one might be the very traditional kind of survey. We can use online surveys, for example. But there are a whole range of different approaches we might adopt. So face-to-face methodologies like interviews, focus groups. And we will hopefully use the whole kind of array of more online technologies that are available to us, online discussion groups, webinars, and so on. And I think there's still a task to think about the variety of different ways that we might be able to engage with this group. It does depend, of course, what exactly that group is going to look like. And the leadership panel is very nearly ready to kind of be launched, and hopefully this week, following this event, we would like to announce the full opening up of the panel and to begin to recruit people to that. And one of the things I wanted to really stress today is that many of the people in this room will be people who would be very interested in talking to, including in the panel and engaging with over time. And I would make that plea to you that if you're interested in taking part in this research, I'd love you to continue to follow that up and to engage with the panel. More to follow, and we will follow up with you. And again, going back to the wider kind of aims of academic research, we will produce a whole wide range of outputs. Traditional academic outputs, which we as academics are required to do. No problem with that at all. But we also feel very much that we have a specific task to engage with policy and wider national debates. But we also see not just that kind of wider, if you like, this kind of amplification role of the research into policy and national debates, but we also see it as a crucial opportunity to engage participants directly in the research through the co-production of knowledge that we've already talked about. And so that could include a whole wide range of things, including events, discussion groups, and kind of direct feeding back of findings to specific members of the panel. So that's, if you like, our central research project. And I think, I see that as having a great deal of potential. And more to follow, more detail to follow in the next couple of weeks. But we also are working on quite a wide range of projects. I mean, Steve has already talked about the project that's been in train for a number of years. All of this feeds into the wider kind of work that we're doing at CVSL. And I just wanted to kind of name check a few of the key projects that will be, some of which are starting in the next couple of weeks, months, others which are a bit more longer running. So, colleagues, with a group of us, we're working on a specific project around leadership for collaboration, which again is a longitudinal over time depth study with specific leaders within the voluntary sector who are working in a very collaborative manner. And we're engaging with those individuals over time with face-to-face interviews, tracking, if you like, tracking their own development and their own thinking on the kind of collaborative leadership challenges. We also have projects that are looking more directly at the development of voluntary action in new communities. So again, this kind of touches on very much the smaller organisations, the community organisations, community groups, which is a key part of the smaller end of the voluntary sector. I think we also have a developing focus on a particular aspect of the voluntary sector provision, and that's around mental health. So a new project which is beginning in November, funded by the NHS, NIHR, is looking at the voluntary sector role in the provision of mental health crisis care. This is a 2-year project, and I think it will, again, has a very kind of engaged sense of feeding directly into the need for enhanced knowledge about the voluntary sector's role in mental health care. We've also recently been successful in being part of a large European, may come as a surprise to many people, and we're involved in a large European Erasmus Plus project, which is looking at the development of entrepreneurial third sector leadership, training and skills provision across the whole of Europe. So it's interesting to be, if you like, part of this, almost like it feels like a bit of a legacy project for working with our European partners, which I think will be really interesting as well and ties directly into the other projects that are ongoing within CVSL and the business school. We also have long-running research that I've been involved with colleagues in University of Birmingham, looking at the commissioning of mental health provision. That, again, has a longitudinal aspect to the work that we're doing. And finally, I wanted to mention work that I've been doing with Rob McMillan, who's just sitting over there, again at University of Birmingham, where we've been tracking the developments around particular reforms to probation services. And again, what's really interesting about this is that we've been doing that in partnership with sector bodies, in this case, CLINCS and NCVO. So again, it's an example of really engaged, kind of relevant research that we've been doing. So on that note, I just wanted to briefly say the types of organisations, without going into specifics, who we've been engaging with. We've been engaging with sector bodies, people like Small Charities Coalition, NCVO, NAVCA, many of whom are represented today. It's really important that we can kind of talk to them and get a sense of shared research interests and shared direction. And hopefully we're doing applied research which is of real benefit to them, but also gives us this opening and this opportunity to reach out to the huge number of organisations that they often represent and work with. So it gives us great reach out into the voluntary sector. But we're also working with local infrastructure bodies, particularly around Milton Keynes, where we've been doing quite a lot of engagement work over the last few weeks and months. So working, directly with local infrastructure bodies who again engage with often with smaller organisations at the local level. We're talking to individual organisations through our research, but also through that research we're talking to specific, as I mentioned before, specific collaborative leaders who work across sector boundaries and across organisational boundaries as well. I mean, that's just a glimpse at some of the engagement we've been doing. So I just wanted to conclude by some kind of final reflections about where I think what we've done so far, some of the kind of key messages that have been emerging from our work to date, and where I think we're going. So these are very much kind of personal reflections on these early months and this early process of engagement and development. Firstly, what I've noticed is that there's a real interest amongst many of the people I speak to. I speak to people on the phone, and I speak to people face to face, or at events and conferences like this. I think there's a real genuine interest in the kind of renewed or refreshed debate around leadership, particularly as it plays out in the voluntary sector. So firstly, I think that relates to the work that we've been doing around, if you like, kind of more abstract or more theoretical debates around leadership. And that's very much part and parcel of the online courses that we're making available. So there's that, but there's also the sense that there's a real interest in kind of real nitty-gritty, kind of practical issues around related to leadership. And I think as we work through that, I think there's both the opportunity to engage people with the more, if you like, the more high-level theoretical and conceptual debates around leadership, but also to help people to work through some of the more practical things. So people speak to me about things like finance, legal issues, and so on, and that's certainly part of the kind of leadership and management challenge. So that remains, and I think we will continue to engage on that issue. The other thing that comes out, and it's come out today very interestingly as well, is that the leadership involves a kind of wide range of stakeholders in the debate, and it's not just about the classical leadership. You might look at the chief executive of an organisation or maybe the senior management team. We see time and time again that people are interested in leadership from the perspective of trustees, from staff across the organisation, and from volunteers. And that's just some of the stakeholders who are involved in the voluntary sector. And I think there's a real appetite for leadership resources and leadership discussion, which comes from all of those different perspectives.